You're listening to Investigation Insiders by Integris Intelligence.
Hello again, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Investigation Insiders. This is Forhad. Hope everyone is doing well and staying safe. As I'm sure you've realized, this is a feel-good show. For the most part, we do our best to keep it that way. I just want to deviate from that slightly today and talk about the mayhem going on in New York City. We did a show a while back with Ed Hartnett talking about crime levels going back to the 80s and 90s. For those of us that were around back then, I think we recognize that it's not really there, but it's not good either. Earlier this week, it hit home. A young Bangladeshi man, which is where I'm from, was shot in the head outside his home in Brooklyn on a block that I've spent a lot of time on. The investigation is still ongoing, but it looks like an attempted carjacking. The man was 34 years old and leaves behind a wife and a 4-year-old son. There are many, many stories like this throughout New York City. I don't want to be shot for my car. I don't want my friends. I don't want my family. I don't want strangers. I don't even want the criminals to be shot. When police officers are being shot and killed, where does that leave the rest of us? We need to fix this. We need to let the police do their job. They know how to do it. So any politicians listening, please help the police do their job. Again, they know how to do it. Hold them accountable, but and I'm sure they're okay with that. But let's clean the city up and stop these senseless things from happening. So again, a bit of a deviation. Let's get back to the show. Joining me today is my right-hand woman, Jo Morrow. How are you, Jo?
I'm doing great. How you doing today?
Doing okay. Doing okay. So today we have another incredible guest. He's a former DEA agent with over 27 years of service. He actually retired as the special agent in charge of the flagship New York office. Since retiring, he's served as a senior security executive in the private sector. So joining us today is Lew Rice. How are you, Lew?
Rod, I'm doing fine, and let me say, my heart goes out to you on the senseless carjacking which led to a murder of your friend. You read about these events or in the newspapers or you hear them on TV, but when it's somebody you know, it really hits home. And my heart went out to you when you described this person and humanized him. And when he's individual, maybe a parent, son, daughter, over a car where if he had a choice, he would have said, "Hey, take my keys. You know, my life is more valuable than the car." But it's a reminder of how cautious we need to be and how random this violence is that can take your life and just change the lives of others around you that love you and depend on you for survival. So my heart goes out to you
Thank you.
and his family.
Thank you. And you know, again, it's something we'll talk about throughout this episode, but it really is something that needs to be changed, and I'm sure we could do it. It's not going to happen by accident. So thank you again so much for joining us today. It really is an honor. Lew and I actually met over 20 years ago. I'm sure I remember more about this, Lew, than you do. But your second career started the same time my first career did. And I was actually a young account manager with Guardsmark, and we provided services to the firm that you became an executive at. I still actually remember our first meeting. I was with Jim and Pat, leaving out their last names, and we met at your office on 6th Avenue. And I have to say, you have always had a presence that I've greatly admired, Lew.
Well, I appreciate that. I remember those days, and when you're captured in time like that, I said, boy, a lot of time has passed since then. So it's been great times, and I do remember that meeting.
Well, so the episode is actually being recorded in February of 2022. It's actually Black History Month, and we wanted to honor the African Americans that have served the country in law enforcement and other security related capacities by having someone we respected tremendously. So we hit the jackpot again when Joe and I bumped into Lew on one of the very few holiday functions that happened this past year and asked him to participate. Fortunately for us, he agreed. So thanks again, Lew.
My pleasure, Forhad.
So I'm gonna actually turn the mic over to Joe so that she can knock law enforcement rings with Lew. So Joe, you're up.
Thank you. Now we're getting into the nitty-gritty of the podcast. So, Lew, it was a pleasure meeting you in December, as Forhad mentioned. And I agree with him.
Joe.
You definitely are a presence in the room. So it was a pleasure to meet you that day. So let me ask you a couple of questions, if you're good.
Sure, absolutely.
All right. So let's start with where did you grow up?
Well, I grew up in Queens, in the projects in Queens. And my dad was a proud New York City detective. Spent most of his time, as I remember, in the 2-5 precinct. And my mom was a caseworker with the Department of Social Services.
Oh, so you wind up going the DEA route. How did you wind up with DEA as opposed to maybe a police officer?
Yeah, so that's an interesting story. So New York has always had challenges with Black and brown teenagers and the police, and I had a special relationship because my dad was a proud New York City police officer, and we used to talk back and forth about crime, criminal justice, and the issues in New York. And the police that I would interact with were different than the colleagues that he had. And as a Black teenager, it seems like to me, the interactions where police would, sort of challenge you and talk to you in a negative way to try to provoke you. And then with that, as the interaction, it wasn't really an organization that I saw that, why would I want to join that organization? And then speaking to my dad, and he would talk about the issues of crime and, a little bit about cases that he was working on, and some were in the media, and give me some inside stories about how the police were helping people in the neighborhood, and that if the people in the neighborhood didn't have the police to go to, they would be the continuous victims of crime, and it would just destroy the neighborhood, whether it's drugs, whether it's money laundering, or whether it's just people saying, hey, give me your money. So going back and forth and learning about that, I said, okay, I understand this a little bit more. What triggered me to think about law enforcement and DEA in particular was growing up in Queens, and a lot of my friends, teenagers, we'd go out to parties with the girls, different places, have a good time, snap on each other back then, make fun of each other, and regular guys. And then I grew up during the height of the Vietnam War, and I went to college. Several of my friends went to Vietnam, and when they came back, they were different people. And also, this is late 60s, early 70s. It's at the height of the civil rights struggle, where our parents were supporting the civil rights leaders of the day, and our parents, as parents often do, were sacrificing for their sons and daughters, realizing that they, as parents, wouldn't benefit from the changes in legislation and the perception of African American kids, but by them supporting the civil rights leaders of the day, they would pave the way for their sons and daughters and nieces and nephews to make progress in terms of employment, housing, education, and to live out their full potential. So when my friends went to Vietnam, they came back, they were still the same friends, but they were addicted to heroin, you know. So they would want to go to parties, hang out with the girls, kid around and whatnot. But everything was, they wanted to get heroin first. And I got to see firsthand the dangers of heroin because several of them overdosed, and then several of them lived unfulfilled lives where they got arrested, they got convicted, they got addicted to heroin, and their parents were devastated. Yeah. Just parents were destroyed. And these were parents I knew. We all grew up together. We eat over different ones' houses. We went to different schools, shared events and celebrations, and just saw the devastation of their parents. And this was in the early 70s. And at a career fair at St. John's University, which is the university I graduated from, we had a personnel specialist, which is known as HR now, and a DEA agent at the career day, and they talked about the organization. But I immediately said to myself, this is a law enforcement organization I can identify with, because I'm going to go out and arrest the major drug dealers, the guys that destroyed the lives of my friends. So that began my career with DEA shortly after I graduated from St. John's in 1974.
All right, I can see why you made that decision. So back again about your DEA career. Can you tell us some of the highlights that stick out in your mind as your career progressed?
Oh yeah, I had an outstanding career with DEA. Fortunately, I get to see some of the men and women I worked with as I, travel around. Not as much as I did when I was, of course, working with the agency. And there's just some great men and women that come to work every day ready to give their lives trying to protect the citizens of America. When you think about narcotics enforcement in particular, and that's what DEA agents do, enforce the federal narcotics laws, it's a specialty assignment in all law enforcement organizations around the country. And why is that? Because of the pressure of working narcotics, working with some dangerous people that always have guns and are willing to kill you because there's a large amount of money involved, and the potential for risk in terms of going to jail is significant, and a lot of jail time involved. It's a stressful occupation. So in all police departments around the country, people rotate in and rotate out of narcotics because of the stress level and the corruption factor, because you're surrounded with significant amounts of money. But as an agency, federal agency, DEA's is a single focus mission to go after those involved in the manufacture, importation, and distribution of illegal narcotics. And they do that extremely well throughout the United States and around the world where they're assigned to different embassies. And so it's just a great bunch of people and a good self-satisfaction you feel working with the team, that America is, I like to say these are America's heroes, and the country is well served by men and women that take these jobs not for pats on the back or for accolades or for a significant salary. They do it because they really believe in the mission, and it's tough work, but it's something that they say, hey, we want to protect our country, we want to protect our communities, and so the communities are well served. A lot of times the public doesn't hear about the work that's being done, and so if you don't hear about it, if you don't see about it, you think nothing's being done, but nothing could be farther from the truth. And I get to see that close up when I went elevated it when I was promoted throughout my career and required me to go out and to touch base with various community organizations to explain to them and businesses to explain to them the mission of DEA and what we do and how we do it, so they understood we were a presence here and how we could help them if they had issues involving narcotics trafficking.
Right. I can feel what you're saying about being part of a team and having that mission and succeeding just
Yes.
because it's a good cause. So our listeners really love war stories. So can you tell us one or two?
I can tell. I can tell you, one in particular. It's and this is since I retired. One. It was a summer day, and walking through Midtown Manhattan, you see the movie vans on the block. So it creates that electricity buzz, and everybody's trying to figure out, well, what movie's being shot here, who are the actors, actresses that are going to be on the scene. Maybe we get a chance to see some of it. And I wound up asking one of the production people, and they told me it was a movie, this back in 2007, called American Gangster. And I said, really? I said, well, who's the gangster? They said, Denzel Washington. I said, no, who's the real gangster? They said, Frank Lucas. And I was spellbound because it just so happened that 30 years ago, I was debriefing Frank for him to testify in federal court in Brooklyn, the Eastern District of New York, and the only case he ever testified in. He had been cooperating and identified over 100 people in various trials, but once they found out he was the key witness, they all pled guilty. And this was the only case that I had that he was going to actually testify and take the stand in court. And it was just amazing that something that I was involved in 30 years ago is now going to be a Hollywood movie led by, one of the greatest actors of all time, Denzel Washington.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
So a lot of the retired guys that were around during that time and working with me in the case where Frank was testifying, we started calling each other. Well, who's going to play you? Who's going to play you? And we're waiting for that phone to ring, but the phone never rang. And it was interesting. No, Hollywood never called. But when I spoke to this lady and she told me, she said, well, you're Frank Lucas, and she said it's told from his perspective, and he's on the scene every day, giving us advice and guidance. And I said, oh, okay, I got it. So if it's told from his perspective, obviously they're not going to talk about the time that I was working with Frank. Nobody wants to get into people cooperating and that kind of stuff because it has its own issues and the danger of it, and it's very much understandable. But it was just interesting to see something that you were intimately involved in being created to be a Hollywood movie, and then the backstory in terms of what's factual, what's not factual.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So let's get back. Let's come into current times now. How do you feel about law enforcement today? What's good and what's bad?
Law enforcement, it's always going to be a challenging job. It's there's a lot of issues going on out there. I think sometimes the media exacerbates the tension sometimes, and there's us against them kind of thing. But I'm connected to various parts of New York City and various communities where various Black and brown communities where they want the police. So we want the police. And I mean, I'll go back to even my days in DEA. This is during the 70s when heroin was, ravaging through the country and definitely in New York City. We would go up to Harlem to do a lot of raids, and we were not driving police vehicles. We were driving mostly seized vehicles because we didn't really have the budget to purchase fancy cars. So we buy the seized vehicles, so they weren't really easily identifiable as police vehicles. But when you're working in the neighborhood constantly, people that are watching can identify these vehicles. And we would drive up in the morning, going to do a major raid, arrest about 15, 20 people on federal warrants for violation of the federal narcotics laws. And you would see the women in the windows basically clapping, and because that was a signal to us that thank you, because these women had children there. They loved their children, and they didn't want their children to either use drugs or be forced by gangs to sell drugs, because they wanted, again, to have their children live fulfilled lives, to go as far as their talents and abilities can take them. And so they knew what our job was, and so they were happy to see us. Now, obviously, because of tensions maybe in the neighborhood, they're not going to be on the street clapping, go get them, go lock these guys up, because these are their neighbors, and they've known them for generations or for years. But they also love their kids, and they also realize that by these guys being away from the community, their kids could thrive. And so I tell that story because that's a lot of what people don't see. I mean, people read sound bites, everybody's so busy, tweets and all this other stuff. But when you're actually sitting down with people in the neighborhoods that are the victims of crime, they'll tell you they don't want less police, they want more police. But they want police that are part of the neighborhood, part of the community, that know the business owners, that know the community groups, that know the young man that's walking around with his pants sagging, that's just doing that because he's a young man and that's the style of a teenager. And always the generational issues between teenagers and parents in terms of style, music, clothing, that stuff. And they know the difference between that teenager and another teenager that's sagging pants because he's part of a gang. And if you're part of the neighborhood, then you know that. You know everybody. You're walking the beat in the neighborhood, and that's what the community wants. They want law enforcement. They're saying no. Not, I was on a call with a Harlem group yesterday, and they said they're not saying less police, so we want more police. So we got a lot of shootings up here. People are feeling intimidated walking around the street. That the gangsters are starting to take over. No, we want the police. We know just by visibly gangsters seeing the police, they're going to change their behavior. They're not going to feel so assertive and aggressive to hurt people. So people want the police.
So it sounds like with the anti-law enforcement sentiment surrounding us today, are you feeling like it's more than just a small group of people who are public and loud about it, or is it more than that?
I think a lot of that is blown up by the media. I mean, there are groups that protest law enforcement, and again, law enforcement is a big organization. I say we, because I still feel I'm part of the fraternity, have badges and guns and a lot of power. So it's incumbent upon us to dot the I's and cross the T's. And when you hear about some of the events around the country, where there's one in Minneapolis now where, and this is after George Floyd of 2020, where you got to see the world, got to see somebody executed on live TV. I mean, if that set law enforcement back 100 years. I mean, if you watch some of that trial, you see the eyewitnesses there that were there that day, and we all saw them on video. Each one on the stand, couldn't get through their testimony without crying. And if you got any kind of compassion, you know from a law enforcement official, you have a man on the ground, on his stomach, handcuffed behind his back. It's over. There's no threat. You put him in the car, you get him to the police station. And then you have a police officer in uniform with his knee on his neck and his hand in his pocket. So the police officer has one hand in his pocket. So obviously this guy's no threat. He's handcuffed behind his back. Obviously he's no threat. And so when you see that, you say the inhumanity of what are you doing?
Right.
And then you have and these are some of the things that we used to talk about in the office before we went out to make arrests. To make sure we had the right amount of manpower, to make sure we had the right equipment, to make sure we had good tactics, working with the local police, maybe we want uniform presence and whatnot, because the goal is we had concluded the investigation. It's time to make the arrest, and then it's on to the next phase. It's up to the jury. So we didn't want anybody to get hurt. We didn't want the defendant to get hurt. We didn't want the innocent civilians that may just be in the area to get hurt, and we didn't want the law enforcement officers to get hurt. So the planning had to be critical, and we wanted to make sure we were going to the right apartments. And so, it was a requirement that I had that you may have been to this location several times over the last 6 months, but the day we go out there to make that arrest and we're going out there, to take this person into custody, you have within 24 hours had to been to that location again to make sure, okay, that it's still at the same location. Make sure that the person still lives there, and we have all the techniques. We verify telephone numbers, vehicles, physical observation, because if we make a mistake and we're carrying guns, somebody can get killed. And that's the case that's happening now in Minneapolis. We're in February of 2022, and this just happened, I think, about a week or two ago, where the police went into the wrong apartment on a no-knock warrant and killed this young man. The family is devastated. His mother and father and his greater family and community are devastated, and anybody with a heart, because if you identify with this is your son sleeping on his couch, and people violently come in and knock the door down, and he did have a weapon, but he had a legal weapon. He has police officers in his family, and I think one of his police relatives, helped him get the weapon, and it's for safety. But somebody's breaking in your door, and violently, and you're figuring you're the victim of a robbery, and everything happens quickly.
Yeah.
Everything happens quickly. So I think there's I think the police. I've always been of the responsibility. The stronger person or the group needs to extend themselves a little bit more. Okay, and if we have badges and if we have guns, it's incumbent upon us to dot the I's and cross the T's. That don't become a victim of your own success because you've done 1,000 search warrants before, and there's been no problem that this 1,001 is going to be the same. Each one is unique. Each one is different. And so you got to prepare for that, because if we have badges and guns, if something happens, you got to fire. You want to make sure that you've done everything you can to ensure you're firing at the right person and you're at the right location.
Right. No, I get that. So you wrote a book that I just finished reading. So reading your book and hearing about you from Forhad, it sounds like you have a lifetime of experience building and maintaining positive relationships. So how do you think we can improve that relationship between the community and law enforcement?
I think we have to talk. We don't really talk. Most talk to their own group, which reinforces their own opinions. They don't talk cross groups. And so that's what's missing, the dialogue. And it's enhanced in 2022 because there's less talking with the generation that's in the workplace now, because everything is a tweet or a text, and you lose the emotion and you lose the follow-up. Because most people want the same thing. They want a system that's fair. They want to have an opportunity to compete in that system. They want to be rewarded when they do compete. and they want to be counseled and helped when they miss the mark. And most people are raised to realize that, hey, there's no success without failures, but failure is not the end of the game. And you can use that failure as a learning experience. And it's like the old adage, is the glass half empty or half full? So perspective determines a lot. But we've lost the connection of talking to each other. And that's something that we really need to work at as a country and society to get back, because life's all about the relationship. You know, and you have a relationship with somebody, you know, that's going to affect how you view them and treat them, either positive or negative. And it's all about the relationship. You know, I can just go back in my career, you know, how many times I've been in a meeting, let's say, and somebody presents an idea, and I'm saying to myself, no way will I vote for this idea, okay? But they have so much passion when they present that idea that they sway me over. I said, obviously this person's seeing something that I'm not seeing at all, but because they have so much passion, they're swaying me over. And so those relationships will get you to alter an opinion or to think differently. It's sort of like traveling around the world. You know, so if somebody asked me how you would create more harmony, I'd have people travel out of their comfort zone, you know, and be with people around their same age, but from different parts of the world or different parts of the city, and realizing how much they have in common. You know, not get exacerbated about what the differences are, but how much they have in common, you know, just by talking. But we don't do that, you know, and we need to create forums where people of goodwill, they grew up in different places, different cultures, different values, can sit at a table, have a cocktail or have a hamburger or meal, and just talk about how they feel about things and learn. Because a lot of us are walking around with misinformation, you know, about other things and other people.
All good points. I appreciate that. Farhad, do you have any comments or questions for?
Well, first of all, on the last point, I had a front row seat to watching. First of all, you talked about Denzel Washington, Lew, and I mean, I thought you were a movie star when I first met you. Just the relationship built. I mean, I'm not kidding you, Joe. Like, the name Lew Rice was coming out of everyone's mouth, right? I mean, literally everybody knew it. And it wasn't by accident. Lew, I got to tell you, I mean, I know you don't know this, and I certainly don't mean this in like some sort of creepy way, but there are people that I watched and I observed and I try to emulate. And that relationship building, look, it's obviously not a secret. I'm a minority as well. And you are one of the few minority faces that I got to see in such a at such a high level. So it was inevitable for me to kind of watch and observe you and try to emulate some of the things that you're doing. And really, it really was incredible. And what's really interesting about some of the things that you're saying is that you're saying, you know, I wanted to listen. That's how I built relationships, was by listening, not talking, right? And by listening and empathizing and all, that's just incredible insight. And, you know, one thing I think that the law, and I am, as you both know, I'm not, I don't have any law enforcement sort of work history. However, I got to, again, have a front row seat for a lot of things. And one of the things I think law enforcement doesn't do a good job of is when folks retire, right? Tapping into that experience and sort of knowledge base after they leave to get advice on current issues. I really would like to see more of that, because I think that, you know, again, the police department, like all of the things that you're talking about, I'd love for them to speak to folks like yourself, to folks like Kevin Donovan, other people that we know, and say, you know what do you guys think? Tell us what you think we could, because I think that would be incredible sort of insight. And being that you're not in that role, you know this, Lew, I mean, when you're sitting in that seat, it's a different perspective. Like you mentioned earlier, perspectives are so important. But when you're out of that seat and are looking from the outside in, I'm sure there are things that you can see that perhaps they can't right now. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I think that's spot on. I think that's an unused talent base. I mean, you have so many, people like me and Joe that retired from law enforcement agencies and the various levels that are still around, and again, still support the core mission. I would love for somebody to try to tap our talent base. And the best part about that is we're not involved in the organization, so there's no, politics, and you can give you a really core opinion on what you need to do, what works, and realizing that you're going to make mistakes along the way. But to not take advantage of the talent base, you're talking about hundreds of years of experience, it's an opportunity that's not being used, and somebody needs to think about that. You guys, you and Joe asked me before about the perception of law enforcement, and I'm thinking about when I was assigned to the Philadelphia office, and I had a conversation with one of the agents from the FBI. Matter of fact, Joe's old organization in Philly, a federal building on Arch Street, and he was the demand reduction, the community outreach person, and he was an ex-New Yorker too. And he said, Lou, I know why you need, African American law enforcement officers. He said, when I was an Irish guy out in the Rockaways, underage drinking, he said the Irish cops would grab me, bring me home to my Irish dad, and they didn't arrest me because they identified with me. The Irish cops, Irish kid, young guy, underage drinking, bring home to Irish dad. And, this is something they realize that dad needs to know, because he's probably may have thought it, but now he caught him. And so he's making sure that you get the message. Don't do this, because you're going to make the mistakes you make now may ruin your life or make it a lot more difficult for you later on. And he said the issue is, probably that African-American kid is not going to get that same break. He's out there, underage drinking. He's not going to be brought home to his parents. And so he's got, a record. It's a minor record, but it's something he's going to have to explain. And so something he did at 16 and 17, and now he's 23, 24. He's mature. He wants to leave home, and, he's got this blemish on his record, something that he may have to explain in a competitive environment. And the boy is going to make a decision. Well, do I give this guy a shot that's got a blemish, or give this guy a shot that doesn't have a blemish? So that perspective is critical. And with that, I just want to add one more thing. I'll never forget. I was assigned to our headquarters, 14th and I, back in the day in Washington D.C., and I was staying with one of the senior African American executives in DEA, and we were just talking after work, and I just noticed out of my corner of my eye there was a guy walking down a block, and it seemed like he was looking at us in particular, or looking at my colleague a little closer. And as he got closer to us, he slowed up, and then he approached, and I'm thinking, this is somebody that John probably arrested back in the day, and he's making the recognition, so this may go bad very quickly. And he came up to him, and he said, "Is your name?" I won't say his last name, but John. He said, "Yeah." And then said his last name. He said, "Yeah." And he said to him, "You were a cop in Oakland." He said, "Yeah." Now, he was a cop in Oakland probably 25 years ago, before he became a DEA agent, right? He said, "You were a cop in Oakland." He said, "I was out in the streets doing some stuff I shouldn't have been doing. You put me in the police car. You brought me home to my mom. My mom went up and down each side of me, and, I never did anything crazy again. And, this is what I'm doing now." And to John's credit, as he always was a connector of human beings, especially young people. he took out his card, he wrote his phone number. He said, well, this is my phone number. You need to talk, you need a reference, you need anything, you call me now. But these are those stories that happen each and every day, but they don't make it to the media and the papers, but it just creates a more powerful and stronger and authentic relationship between law enforcement and the community.
Yeah.
I mean, again, those are just fantastic. And again, one of the really interesting things about like this show, Lou, is, we initially just did it to stay in front of people, right? I mean, during the pandemic, and allow them to kind of listen to these things. And really, it was a marketing thing, right? I mean, that's really what it was. But as it sort of evolved, I mean, we're getting all these like incredible people like yourself to join us, tell their stories, tell these anecdotes, kind of offer their opinion on certain things. And I just think that is turning out to be such an amazing thing. And voices that may otherwise go unheard, but are so critical to just, what's going on today. So again, it really is a great honor to have you on here. And so to kind of transition now I'd like to talk about Black History Month a little bit with you. And so what does it mean to you? What does Black History Month mean to you?
So thank you, Forhad. So Black History Month to me is a time where the whole nation, celebrates and recognizes the many contributions that African Americans have made to the society in the arts, science, and to our culture, and in business. And it's really American history, and it's a history that should be taught in schools, especially at a very young age. Because if you don't, and New York is a multicultural city. It's the capital of the world, and even with the pandemic, I mean, people want to go to New York City. That's where the energy is. That's where the excitement is. That's where the diversity is. And people respect and appreciate that. But if you don't learn about somebody else's culture, you can tend to grow up thinking that they didn't contribute anything, and then you're treating them in a way that you shouldn't really treat them. And a lot of this is a lack of awareness. So shame on our schools that we don't, increase the education and the contribution that African Americans have made to this country, especially coming out of slavery. I mean, I have the opportunity to go to the museum in Washington, D.C., the Slave Museum. It just, it made me angry. It made me sad. And you shed a tear, when you talk about how people were treated just because of their color.
Yeah.
Thrown off ships, and the sharks circling the ships, and parts of the South, and even in New York City, where African Americans men were lynched for being too outspoken or whatever. With that history and with that backdrop, people still, the African American community, have achieved greatness. You look at what's going on in New York City now. When you talk about Black history, you have an African American mayor for the second time in over 20, 25 years. You have the first African American female police commissioner.
Yep.
You have the U.S. Attorney in the Eastern District and the Southern District are both African American. Just amazing things that are going on where people didn't give up and kept, moving forward and, get setbacks along the way. But again, the glass is half full, keep moving forward and progress. And I think about the people in my life that helped me, what I wouldn't give for, a few more minutes talking to my mom, who gave me the confidence. My dad, who was a role model and the patience of Job, and he just had great wisdom about how to carry yourself as an African American male. And another legendary person in DEA's history, Arthur, who came on as a clerk in the 1950s and retired as the deputy administrator, number 2 position at DEA during some tough times. And then went on to a successful career at the Sands Hotel and Casino in Atlantic City. And it just was a role model like that. He would always put his hand on my shoulder and tell me it's going to be all right, and whatever I can do to help you, I'm going to help you.
Yeah. No, I mean, so I guess, do you remember like some of the challenges that you faced in your life? I mean, does anything stick out, just from being?
I remember a lot of the challenges. I mean, when DEA was formed in 1973 July by then President Nixon because of the drug situation in the country and primarily in New York City, and I came on in the following year, 1974. And it was tough. I mean, it was the racial issues that were in the country, especially New York City, exacerbated again by the media, and definitely in that office. You had really tension. You had black agents. I graduated in June, and I became a DEA agent in October. I didn't go down to school until the following January, 1975. But that would never happen like that. Now, right. I mean, you apply, and through the application process, it's going to be 12 to 18 months. But because there was a major heroin problem, and it was the mafia, the importation and the distribution with the African American gangsters, they wanted the African American agents to work undercover. And so, when I interviewed, with the panel, there were several on the panel that said, this guy is so young, and I'm 21 years old, and I look 21 years old. Can he do this dangerous job? And then the other group said, well, his dad's a Harlem detective, so not only a detective, but a Harlem detective. So he's got that street savvy, and, he's close to his dad, and he's got a degree at St. John's in criminal justice. And then the other part is, we're going to have him working undercover. Nobody ever suspect this guy is a federal agent, but with that, and doing the most dangerous assignment, working undercover in bars, after hour joints by yourself, the black agents couldn't get promoted, and so that was a big challenge, and the challenge was created in Washington because they were determining who around the country got promoted, but it created friction in the field where people did not want to work with each other, where people were angry at each other, and even some of the people that got promoted knew they shouldn't have gotten promoted, and they were apologizing. But you can imagine working the most stressful assignment in law enforcement undercover, where you got to be on your A game and watch the nonverbal cues, making sure you're not getting set up for a hit to get hurt, and then going back to the office where you should be able to relax and unwind, and you got to have the stress in the office also. So looking back on it, it was a crazy time, and a lot of challenges along the way in the different places I've worked. I started in New York City, but I worked in Kingston, Jamaica. My first supervisory assignment was in Miami. From Miami, I transferred to our headquarters in Washington, D.C. Was promoted there in Washington and went to Philadelphia. From Philadelphia, I got promoted to go back to New York City to run the New York Drug Enforcement Task Force, which is the largest task force for DEA in the nation. And then from there, I went to Detroit as a special agent in charge in Detroit. And at that time, it covered the states of Michigan, Ohio, and Kentucky. Kentucky has now been split off to another division. And then from Detroit, I was transferred to the flagship office and promoted as a special agent in charge of the New York office. And that was sort of like a dream come true for me, starting at 21 years of age, doing the basic agent job to lead the largest office for DEA. So I had a great career, great run, and the best part about it, I still get to see some of these men and women as I move around.
Sure. I mean, again, I think just, there's obviously a lot to unpack there. And, I'm sure there's many more challenges that we don't have time to sort of discuss, but you overcame them. And I mean, you had an incredibly successful career that, again, people like myself and many, many others look up to. So how does it feel today to sort of be someone looked at as sort of setting that blueprint of, changing things?
Forhad, I appreciate those accolades, but if I would describe myself, I would describe myself as a man that tried to take advantage of an opportunity that knew, as an African American male, that I was going to be judged and will be judged by a double standard. And as I moved up the leadership ranks, try to create and surround myself with people that understand that challenge. And it may not be right, it may not be, but that's the way it is, and that we have to dot the I's and cross the T's. But it is stressful. I mean, anytime you're a person of color in a highly visible or first-time position, it's extremely challenging. It's extremely challenging, but you realize you have an opportunity, and you try to do it to the best of your ability, and you realize that you're going to make mistakes. But hopefully people will realize that they're not mistakes of the heart, that you were trying to do the right thing based on the information that you had. And I think the most important challenge that I kept in my mind as I moved around in supervisory positions with DEA, and we were really proactive and aggressive out there, that we did everything we could to make sure nobody got hurt. Because I never wanted to be that executive explaining to a spouse that their loved one was killed in the course of us doing, our job, knowing in the back of my mind that we were sloppy. I never wanted to be that. And so sometimes we get some challenges with the agents. I'd want to add more manpower, or I wasn't convinced that although these people are saying they have drugs, large amounts of drugs, that they always have. Because you can imagine the tension with, you make your owns by locking up major drug dealers. So you got a guy that's saying he's a major drug dealer, and he's really not. He's a rip-off artist. But right. The agent can't see the forest for the trees. He just wants the money or the approval to go out there. So you have the challenges going back and forth, and then trying to keep the morale up, but trying to keep the safety level up also. But realizing that it's a risk-taking business. When you get out there, we plan a scenario that's going to go A, B, C. And once we get out there, nothing that we plan could happen, but we got to be able to quickly react and not overreact. And it's not like TV where you can cut another script. Things are happening fast. So having enough manpower and taking the time to make sure that these are actual drug criminals, major drug criminals, is important before you hit the street. But a lot of challenges along the way. But knock on wood, I was able to develop and create a loyal team that could help me and understood the big picture.
Sure. No, I mean, that's obvious. And again, I just want to go back to the point I made earlier about tapping into folks like Lew. So anyone in a leadership position currently in law enforcement that, again, he so much has said, I'd like to offer help. I'd like to offer my opinion. I hope someone reaches out, or more than someone reaches out and taps into sort of your knowledge base, because I do think that it would really go a long way. So I have a couple of last remaining questions, but before I move on to those, Joe, do you have any questions or comments on anything Lew just said?
The only comment I have is that I'm just impressed by, even from reading the book and where he stood and always making the right decision for the team and for the community and the public. it speaks to your leadership qualities, and I'm glad that you were in the position you were for that time, and passing that forward to people that worked under you. So I appreciate that.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you very much.
So, Lou, I have a couple of final questions for you, right? And it's sort of the whole law enforcement side. I'm sorry.
No problem.
So the first question is, if you had a message for law enforcement personnel today as it relates to policing lower income minority communities, what would it be? And then the second part of that question is, if you had a message for that same lower income minority communities related to law enforcement, what would it be?
So the message to the police is everybody's not against you. I think as you make connections in diverse communities and you establish those relationships, you'll find out that support you. Okay, and you'll find out, yeah, some people don't support you, but you'll find out overwhelmingly most people support you. They just want to be treated with respect. As I tell people, that law enforcement is successful because they work very hard, but they get a lot of information also. And so it's in your interest to treat people with respect, because when they hear or see something that maybe they're not down with, they need somebody they can call and talk. And so if you've established a positive relationship, you're going to be that person that's going to get that call or going to get that text. And it's just good relationships. When you think about police, it's all about service. And so service means you have a smile on your face. Service means that you don't know everything. If you're talking with a different culture, you want to understand and try to look at the issue from the other person's position. That's what life's all about. You bring your perspective, they bring their perspective. And for people in the neighborhood, you need to always continue to keep law enforcement honest, ask the questions, why things are happening, and get involved to the extent that you can. What can you do to turn it around? Because nobody can do this by themselves. And all law enforcement organizations that I'm aware of are seeking input from the community around the country. They want community involvement because they know they can't be there 24/7. They know that this has to be perceived as a partnership, and the community has to feel that there's a partnership and they're respected. And so the community has to take a chance and join a police council or join an organization that puts them in contact with the police, and they'll see the change. One of the organizations I've been involved with is the Law Enforcement Explorer Program. And the NYPD leads that program in New York City with close to 35 to 4,000 young men and women in various communities that are partnered with New York City police officers, FBI agents, DEA agents, MTA, I think is a part of it, and the U.S. Marshals also. And for all that think that's all friction between black and brown and law enforcement, if you ever get an invitation, and this is probably before the pandemic, to go down to police headquarters in August when you had that graduation, you'd be amazed. The energy and the electricity in that room, where all these teenagers, and I'm talking about several thousand teenagers, and add plus that up with their parents, relatives, and loved ones, watch them go across the stage and take a picture with the police commissioner. And it's a big deal for the police department because the police commissioner has his command staff on stage, the chief of department, first deputy, chief of patrol, and the heads of the other federal agencies and the organizations I mentioned earlier. And each one of these young men and women go across the stage and take a picture with the police commissioner. And you talk to the law enforcement team, they love the program. And that's so many cops volunteer and special agents volunteer for the program. It's a benefit for the kids, but it's definitely a benefit for the law enforcement officials also, because when they see these young men and women, they see themselves. They see somebody that maybe doesn't have it figured out, but it's a good kid, and they put their hand on their shoulders and basically say, "I'm going to help you to figure it out," And prior to that, we used to have a graduation before the reception, And one of the explorers would always speak and talk about how their parent, grandparent, aunt, or uncle wanted them to get involved with the program, and tough neighbor, challenging neighbor. They didn't want to get involved in the program. I don't want to get involved. I don't want to go in the precinct. And then they talk about the police officer they were partnered with could have been a big brother or big sister to them, and it's exciting. And then they go tell the other, kids in the neighborhood, yeah, we need to hang out with these guys. These guys, these men and women, they're us. They're from the neighborhoods. They know the dances, they know the lingo, and they're trying to, keep the criminals from hurting us. These are good people. So again, it all goes back to that relationship. It's easy to be against somebody that you don't sit down and talk to. But the most successful people I've seen, I'm talking about success when you transcend your group, because anybody can be successful in their own group. But I'm talking about when you can transcend your own group, it means you're open to hear difference of opinion and learn from that. You don't have all the answers, and create an environment where people feel comfortable expressing their opinion.
That's just it's a great way, actually, as we conclude this episode. I think that's just a great message to walk away with. So Lew, thank you, first of all, for your service to the country. You're a great American, and I'm certainly glad that we crossed paths. I'm certainly just ecstatic that we got to sit down and sort of memorialize this conversation, and it'll certainly be part of our history books. And I hope that many people listen to this and hear what you're saying, and hopefully, again, like I said, reach out to you. So thank you so much. Joe, you have anything to add to that?
No, just my thanks. I appreciate your time and adding to our library of podcasts. This is a wonderful addition. So thank you so much for your time.
And I want to thank you, Forhad, and you, Joe, for extending the invitation. And it's always a pleasure, puts a smile on my face to talk about some of the people I used to work with back in the day in DEA. Just some great people in the extended law enforcement family that a lot of people in the neighborhoods don't get to see on a regular basis, but people are just committed to do the right thing. And I'm going to end with this. For all those that, despite what I said, still believe there's a lot of friction, I tell people that no matter what's going on in the nation, the citizens of the U.S. know if they call 911, they're going to get a credible response. And that's not the case everywhere in the world. There are parts of the world, and Forhad and Jo, you know very well, that no matter what crime is taking place, the last people you would call would be the police. We are fortunate that citizens know if you need help anytime, day or night, you call 911, you're going to get a good response. And that doesn't happen anywhere.
That's a great way to end it, Lew. Thank you again. Thank you all for tuning in. Continue sending your comments and following us. Till next time. Talk to you soon.
All right. Have a wonderful day.
Bye-bye. Don't forget to follow us. We are on LinkedIn and Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube.